start recording. And as we have before, we'll just let folks come into the room, give everyone a few minutes. Welcome, welcome attendees. Welcome folks watching on Facebook. We will get started shortly. Hello, welcome. We will get started here in just a little bit. All right, welcome. I think we have someone joining by device or phone that's not showing up there, but I see we have a few attendees. And hello, watching on Facebook. Thanks for tuning in. We will get started in just a minute. All right, well, I'll just introduce us all really quick. My name is Wing. I work with the City of Portland. I'm one of the coordinators of the Fix Affairs, which are normally in-person events, pretty big events that provide community resources. We bring together different partners to talk about a whole host of things, saving money, living more comfortably, saving energy, growing your own food, and staying healthy. And since the pandemic, we've been bringing you similar topics in an online setting. So it's Fix Affair at home. And today I am very excited to welcome our friends from Civic Life, Jenny and Danielle. Thank you for joining us. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. I'll start sharing our presentation with you all. So first off, just wanted to say hello, and we want to acknowledge that this is in collaboration with the Oregon Department of Transportation. We are with the Office of Community and Civic Life. In particular, we're with the Community Safety Program. And I'll take a few minutes to introduce my colleague and myself to you all. So your trainers, Daniel Franco Nunez and Jenny Poland. I'll have our contact information up in the next slide. Just some brief reminders around housekeeping. Since this is a webinar format, I guess we're in a good situation where people can't unmute themselves. Typically, we ask people to just be more cognizant of that mute, unmute button, but that's not necessarily a concern at this moment. If anybody feels like filling out a demographic survey, we would really appreciate it. It allows us to know how many people and the types of people that we are able to reach through these trainings. It just provides us more feedback for how to make sure we're providing services in an equitable manner. Here are our contact information. There you see my name at the top with my phone number, my email address, and then my colleague, Jenny Poland, with her phone number, her email address. And at the bottom, it's our website for our entire bureau, which is your usual portlandoregon.gov/civic. And it'll take you to not just our program, but all the programs that Civic Life offers. Just quickly, Jenny, anything you would like to add to the conversation?
Thank you for having us today. And just know that we do provide trainings on other topics. We also provide security assessments for properties. So if any of these sound of interest to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thanks for joining us today to learn about pedestrian safety.
All right, so at the City of Portland and the Office of Community and Civic Life, we work to empower neighborhoods to promote the common good, that's our tagline, by creating safe communities that increase livability, walkability, driving, biking, whatever mode of transportation you use to get around in our streets. That's right. I did that yesterday too. Now, the reason this is important is because traffic crashes are the #1 cause of unintentional injury or death in the US, especially for people between the ages of 5 and 24. And it's also the second most preventable cause of unintentional injury or death for those 25 and up. So this is a pretty important topic that we're going to cover today that affects a lot of people's lives. Traffic crashes are also the leading cause of unintentional death in Oregon. And important, in 2018, there were 35 fatalities due to car crashes, and 16 of those deaths were pedestrians, or 46%. In addition, 4,650 people in our community were injured in car crashes in Portland. Safety is an area where we can make differences in our communities, where we can care for our communities and make them safer simply by knowing the law and following the law. Now, here's a Latin phrase, and excuse me if I mispronounce it, but it's ignorantia juris non excusat, which means ignorance of the law excuses not. This is a legal principle that a person who is unaware of a law may not escape the consequences of violating that law just because they say they didn't know it. As an Oregonian, Portlander, or any community member, you are responsible for knowing the laws that apply to you in your community. The reason we're talking about pedestrian law for both drivers and pedestrians is because pedestrian deaths have been on the rise across all of the US, not just Portland. But for the past 5 years, pedestrian deaths have been on the rise here in Portland. By being responsible road users, no matter what our mode of transportation, we can save lives. We may never know whose life we save. It might even be our own. And traffic safety is one of the ways that I choose to make a difference in my community. Most often when police or myself receives a complaint about traffic issues in a community, it's the community members themselves who are causing the problem. The most clear example of this is speeding. And it's interesting that most traffic crashes happen within 25 miles of a person's home. This is why we often say that familiarity breeds complacency. We are most familiar driving and walking near where we live. So we might not pay as much attention because we think we simply don't need to. Now, just thinking about yourself. How many of you drive as your main mode of transportation? How many of you walk is your most main mode of getting around? Well, both those groups of people have responsibilities, and we can all benefit from the training today. Now, be aware, pedestrians are often hit on the right-hand turn. Now, let's dig into a driver's responsibility when it comes to pedestrian law. And we're going to go over various scenarios in the next few slides. We're going to discuss the driver's responsibility at crosswalks to pedestrians because pedestrian deaths are up. Now, stop and remain stopped at any crosswalk, marked or unmarked. We're going to talk about that often during this seminar or this webinar. Until people have cleared the lane you're going to turn into and the next lane next to them. Now let's see some examples about that. We're going to see a car pull up to the intersection, and then we're going to see a pedestrian who's going to walk. Now, as we see in this case of the red car, the pedestrian needs to finish crossing the road completely. because they need to finish going across the lane the car is in, but then continue on to the next one. Now, when turning at a traffic signal, stop and remain stopped until people crossing have cleared the lane you are turning into, and at least 6 feet of the next lane. Let's see how this ends up impacting our next scenario. So these are known as buffer zones. And it's really important to, sometimes when we're in a hurry, we simply want to turn and we're waiting for the pedestrian to just move enough out of the way so that we can turn into our lane. But it's really important to give pedestrians a buffer zone for their own safety. Obviously, in a competition between a car and a human, the human is going to lose. So they need extra consideration. So looking at the pedestrian, we need to see that we need to give them room to cross the lane the blue car wants to turn into, but then at least 6 feet of the next lane over. Now, how about when a car is turning right? As we see the white car with the little arrows that it wants to go right. What can happen here? Well, a pedestrian is coming down the road towards the white car. I'm sorry, in this case, they're moving away from the white car. So in this situation, the white car needs to wait at least until they get to the middle of the road by those yellow lines before they turn into that first right-hand lane. However, being the street, sometimes there are more pedestrians that are coming. Well, if you have one pedestrian leaving, but another one coming down the street, should you try and squeeze in there when there's a little bit of room? The safest thing to do is to wait. If there's a pedestrian coming, even though you may be in a hurry, it's most important to wait and let that pedestrian finish crossing all the way across just to be safe. Now, we also need to be really aware of what it is that we have to be aware of in school zones. In school zones, we want to stop and remain stopped completely, not until the pedestrians are across the street, but until the crossing guard is back on the sidewalk. Obviously, crossing guards are often parents, volunteers, maybe a teacher or a teacher's aide. They are not officers. So they're also normal people like you and me, and they also are doing what could be a pretty dangerous job to help students cross the street. Give them a little bit of extra space as well. For people who are blind, they will often be using a cane or a seeing eye dog. For these individuals, it's really important that we stop and remain stopped until they are completely across the street for their own safety. And if we were in a similar situation, I'm sure we would appreciate that same type of consideration. Let's look at this scenario. There's somebody at the crosswalk. They want to cross the street. We notice they have a cane. A car pulls up. They want to turn left into that first turn lane. They might be in a rush. They might be in a hurry. But despite that, it's really important to give consideration to the pedestrian with the cane that indicates that they might have a difficulty seeing. In this case, we want to wait until they are completely across the street before we turn into the street. That way we ensure that we won't be putting anybody in any unnecessary danger. Now, in Oregon, every intersection is a crosswalk. And if a pedestrian crosses at an unmarked crosswalk or an intersection without the crosswalk white lines, the car must still behave as if it was a marked crosswalk. What does this mean? Well, let's use another image following up. So in this photo, how many crosswalks are in this intersection? And as we can see, it's the intersection of 122nd and Broadway. Well, there are 4 crosswalks in this one intersection. And there's one there, one there, one there, and one there. Now, none of them are marked as crosswalks, but those are all crosswalks. Let's try another example of a intersection that looks a little bit different. How many crosswalks are in this intersection? Well, we can see that there are two obvious ones that are marked, but there's also two not so obvious ones that are not marked. There's one at the top and one at the bottom. Now, for our next one, how many crosswalks are in this intersection? Well, in this one, there are three. And again, none of them are marked. One right there on 75th, the other side of 75th, and along Division. Now, we're going to see one that is a little bit more complicated. Let's look at a different part of Stark between 126th and 125th. How many crosswalks do you think are here? In this intersection, there are three. We see there's one clearly marked with a zebra line down the middle. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those islands in a bit. But that's the one crosswalk that is marked. Other than that, there's one on the right, and then there's the one on the left. However, as people who drive around Portland know, people don't always cross at crosswalks. It's really important to point out in this particular image so that we're all clear that there's a couple spots that are not crosswalks. This is at either end of a driveway. So that's not a street where the red X's are at, that's somebody's driveway. And sometimes people think that that is an okay place to cross the street, and it's not. It's not too far from the actual legal crosswalk. So whenever we are looking to cross the street, we should try to cross at the marked or unmarked crosswalks. But either end of somebody's driveway is not a crosswalk. So going back into the section where we are looking at the little island, you'll see these coming up in new developments. And you'll see that oftentimes these islands also have like little flashing beacons. These are called rapid or rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or RRFBs. And they are placed to alert drivers to the presence of pedestrians. RRFBs don't change a driver's responsibility. It's just a nice warning for drivers. It's also important to note that these are usually put in high-risk areas for a reason. So if you are going to cross and you see this type of crosswalk, an island, and the flashing lights, it's usually there because there's been fatalities or close incidences in the past. So be extra careful as you're driving past any of these. The way it works is that the pedestrian would push the button and then the lights would start to blink. So this is what it might look like from the top, and then a closer shot at it. Now, something important to remember is that pedestrians don't always push the buttons for the lights to turn on. They might have difficulty seeing. They might think it's motion activated, like so many other things in our automated world. But just a reminder to drivers that whether or not the lights are flashing, oftentimes we think that pedestrians have to wait for the lights to come on, and they don't. The lights are just there as a courtesy to drivers. And what I like in particular about this picture is that you can see back where that taxi is stopped at the yield lines, those little triangles. In an image later on, we're going to remind drivers that it's important for them to stop well back of the crosswalk. And this image illustrates that really well. The picture later on doesn't do the same job as this one of pointing that out, but just something for everybody to keep in mind. Now, let's talk a little bit about drivers' responsibilities at the RRFBs. Their drivers need to look for the flashing beacons at specific locations. You can see them usually, especially if you have a commute that you regularly travel on. Like I mentioned, they're usually in newer roads that are being developed or updated. They're also responsible when you see flashing RRFBs, look for bicyclists or for other pedestrians. If somebody is trying to catch up to their family member or their friend, don't assume that the only person there is the only person that's going to walk. It would be a good idea to treat these almost as a yellow light. Just be a little bit careful when going through them when the lights are done, even if the pedestrian you just saw across the street is the only one you think is crossing the street. Now, let's see a pretty good example of a pedestrian using the RRFBs correctly. They push the button. We can see the light is on, but they're also looking up. They're looking up, they're aware of their surroundings, they're not looking at their phone. They're also making sure that the person, if any drivers are coming, they're stopping well behind where they need to be. Now, the driver needs to stop behind the bold white line in advance of the crosswalk and remain there until the pedestrians have crossed the adjacent lane or the lane next to the one they're actually in. Now, as a driver, you need to proceed with caution after pedestrians have cleared the crossing. We're going to go on into some did you know. So this is something really important for drivers to be aware of, but also for pedestrians to understand that it applies to them. So a pedestrian in Oregon law, a pedestrian is in a crosswalk when any part of the pedestrian moves into the crosswalk at a crosswalk with the intent to cross. Now, this is in Oregon ORS Chapter 811. And let's look at a couple examples of people in close to crosswalks, but one that doesn't meet the requirement of somebody actually showing intent, and then somebody that does. So this young lady, as we mentioned earlier, the pedestrian that we used as an example had her head up, was looking at traffic. She isn't. She is on her phone, and it doesn't look like she has intent to cross. But this young family, although they're further away from the street than the previous example, they are showing clear intent to cross the street. So when you see somebody waiting to cross the street in this manner, it's your responsibility as a driver to stop and let them cross. And if you fail to do so, you can be fined up to $250 for not yielding to pedestrians. Now, let's see another example. Again, they have a foot on the crosswalk, so a little bit brave, but they're also looking up and waiting for the car to make sure that it actually stops. Another good example of a pedestrian following the rules as well as the driver following their own responsibilities. Now, this is a good way into a driver's responsibility, and my colleague will take it from here.
Thank you, Danielle. So as a driver, you also have responsibilities to help keep pedestrians safe. So let's talk about the driver's responsibility. And this is according to the ORS Chapter 811 in Oregon. To be extra vigilant at dusk, it starts to become very difficult to see that time of day. Never pass a stopped vehicle at a crosswalk. Assume that that vehicle is stopped, waiting for a pedestrian. Try to stop 30 feet before the crosswalk. Danielle did point this out in an earlier photo where a vehicle had stopped with a very good distance between it and the crosswalk that had the flashing lights. So a good distance is going to be safe for all. Never block an intersection or a crosswalk where pedestrians may be present. That could actually force those pedestrians to have to walk around your vehicle, potentially putting them in harm's way. Be careful when you're pulling out of your driveways or your parking spaces. A good practice is to walk around your vehicle once before you get in it to leave, checking for children or pets or anyone who may be behind that vehicle. And remember, if you drive a large vehicle like an SUV or a truck, it may be more difficult to see pedestrians, particularly children, or people using mobility devices such as a wheelchair. Next, let's talk about distracted driving. There's many different ways to be distracted when you're driving, not just with a smartphone, but changing the radio station. People think it's safe to put on makeup or text or eat or do all sorts of things when they're stopped at an intersection, right? Because you're not moving, you're stopped. It's a good time to do these things. It is not. Intersections are where most crashes occur. And while most of these are fender benders, pedestrians are incredibly vulnerable to road users. What may cause just a dent in a car can cause serious injury and even death to a pedestrian. Really important to stay aware, even when you're sitting still in your vehicle in an intersection. So where is the safest place to cross a street for a pedestrian? Well, it's at that intersection. So we're all paying attention and staying aware, whether we're the driver or the pedestrian, that is the safest place to cross. So first, the pedestrian's responsibility is to obey all traffic control devices. Give a clear indication that you're going to cross the street. And cross at crosswalks and intersections. Pay attention and don't be distracted while you're walking. There's so many potential ways to be distracted as a driver or a pedestrian, so stay aware. Now, the pedestrian does not always have the right of way. And did you know that a pedestrian can be cited? Yes, a pedestrian commits the offense of failing to yield to a vehicle if they do the following. If a pedestrian suddenly leaves a curb or other place of safety to move into the path of a vehicle that is so close as to be an immediate hazard. And this sounds like very risky behavior. We want to stay safe. If a pedestrian fails to yield the right of way to a vehicle by crossing the roadway at any point other than a marked crosswalk or an intersection. So we now know an intersection and a marked crosswalk is where it's okay to cross as a pedestrian. Okay. Now, as a pedestrian, it is your responsibility to walk on the sidewalk. And if there's no sidewalk, walk on the shoulder and walk facing traffic. Don't step out into moving traffic. Even if you think you have the right of way, it's safest to wait for all vehicles to stop before you go. Be vigilant at dusk. Wear bright clothing. Be seen. Use a flashlight or a headlamp, especially on those dark, rainy, foggy, overcast nights that we experience so much in Oregon. And whenever possible, cross the street of an intersection or a crosswalk. Even if it means going a little bit further, travel a little bit of an extra distance for your safety. Now, if there isn't a crosswalk, find a well-lit area where you have the best view of traffic. And likewise, where you're more likely to be seen by drivers. Only cross after you've looked all directions and obey all pedestrian signals at an intersection. When crossing multiple lanes, don't assume all vehicles will stop, even if you are at a crosswalk with traffic lights. And as you're crossing each lane, check to make sure that the driver is stopped. Try to make eye contact with drivers. That's best for everyone's safety. And once all vehicles have stopped, walk, don't run. Now, looking at walk signals, here's your walk signal 101 lesson. So a white walk signal or a green light means that it's your turn to go, but you should still check for traffic first. Don't assume that everyone is being as vigilant as you are. So double check that vehicles are slowing down and coming to a stop before you proceed to cross. Next, a flashing hand. This means it's too late to start, but it's fine to continue if you've already begun crossing. It does not mean start and run, all right? And then a solid red hand means that you must wait until it's safe to cross and you're given that walk signal again. Now, as a pedestrian, it is your responsibility to let drivers know you intend to cross by putting out a foot, an arm, or a cane indicating you're ready. It's your responsibility to establish eye contact with the driver if you can. And if you're not sure a driver sees you, then let that car go first. Now, if you don't want to cross, step back from the edge of the roadway. Stay alert and avoid distractions. And don't step out from between parked cars. This is really unexpected for a driver. Watch for cars entering or exiting driveways. And remember, many vehicles these days, electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, they run very quiet. So pay attention with all of your senses, not just your ears, but your eyes, looking around and staying aware. Did you know every intersection is a crosswalk, whether it's marked or not? If a pedestrian crosses outside of an intersection, they must yield to motor vehicle traffic. So when you look at this next image, I want to ask you, who has the right of way? You can see in this image that there are two people, two pedestrians in the lower half. There's a median and there's traffic traveling in both directions. So in this situation, it is safe for a pedestrian to cross where there's an intersection or a marked crosswalk. So you're looking at a Southeast 126th Avenue and 125th Avenue. So if those pedestrians were to walk down to those intersections and cross, that would be fine. They also have these striped marked pedestrian crosswalks in the middle that will lead them to the median. And it looks like, it's hard to tell, but there are likely to be the flashing RRFB lights for them to activate as well. It is not okay for them to cross where there is a driveway. That is not a right of way for a pedestrian to cross, okay? So this is a median or an island, and sometimes, I don't know if we have an image pulled up here, Danielle, let's see.
Next slide has bullet points, not an image. But it does say this is a median, but there's no image there.
Thank you. All right. So this is a median or an island, and sometimes with RRFBs, like this one, you have to push the second button to cross the second half of the street. So remember, RRFBs are flashing pedestrian cross lights. Don't change a driver's responsibility. It's just a warning device. And remember, these stand for rectangular rapid flashing beacons, and that's a mouthful. So RRFB, or just a flashing light. So first, push the button to activate it. Look to make sure cars have stopped before you cross the street, and continue to be aware of traffic while crossing. And cross. If there's a median island, check again to see that all cars have stopped before you continue. If the cars in the lanes you are approaching have not stopped, press the button again and make sure cars are stopped before crossing the second half of the street. And you'll see in these images that there are median islands, and these are situations where you will likely need to press that beacon light a second time as you're crossing. So here's another example. You reach the island, and it's likely that you'll push the button again to continue crossing the next lane of traffic. Since 2000, more Americans have died in car crashes than in both world wars. That's more than 30 million injuries as well. The most dangerous thing that I do every day is either drive or walk. So stay safe out there, whether you're walking or driving, and be aware of your surroundings. And we bring this presentation in collaboration with the Oregon Department of Transportation. If you have questions or concerns about traffic safety, you can contact ODOT directly, and we've provided that contact information here on this slide. Ask ODOT at odot.state.or.us is a great place to get started about your traffic concern. We thank you for joining us for this presentation today. And if there are any questions, we're happy to take a look at those in the chat. And I'll just allow a moment for that.
And there was one question that somebody submitted in advance. They said, in advance, I wanted to ask if the team teaching this will include anyone from PBOT. And so PBOT trained us, but neither Jenny nor I work for PBOT. And it says, and or organizations which are advocates for street safety. So Civic Life, while we're not engineers or civil engineers, we do advocate for safety, both personal safety and pedestrian safety, as we talked about today. I think it's important to acknowledge that our streets are historically built for automobiles, and efforts to alter that have been slow. That's true. We can teach pedestrian safety all we want, and we can even educate those of us who are drivers and want to be better, but without street design to protect and prioritize the most vulnerable who are walking, rolling, and otherwise not in a vehicle, we are really putting the onus on people that already care about our own safety, and not on the roads that allow drivers to travel at unsafe speeds and speeds to easily do so. So as we mentioned in our presentation today, both drivers and pedestrians have responsibilities, and there are laws that govern both those groups. The difficult thing is that, as was mentioned by both myself and Jenny, if something might be a small fender bender for a car, it can be a serious injury or even death to a pedestrian. So it's really important for pedestrians to just be aware, and also for drivers to also learn and educate. Drivers also have traffic enforcing police officers that are there to help them follow the rules and stuff. But I agree with you that hopefully smarter, better streets will be what we end up creating moving forward. And with that, I'll stop sharing the slideshow, and we can see if there's any other questions.
Thank you, Danielle. I have a friend that was walking through a grocery store parking lot, leaving the grocery store, and a car was slowly backing out, and they hit her, and she ended up with a broken hip. So it's, you know, we just have to be extra vigilant and pay attention all around for sure.
Well, Jenny and Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today. That was great. Really appreciate the work that you do and for being here. And thank you everyone who joined us for the workshop. Really appreciate you spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. Everyone, stay safe out there. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye for now.